He was the most important part of the Karate Kid movie. He was the quiet teacher whose smart words helped a whole bunch of kids. But what happened when the cameras weren't rolling was totally different. Before Pat Morita died, the man who played Mr. Miyagi finally told everyone what really happened when they were making the movie. It wasn't just about saying lines, doing kicks, or standing like a crane. It was about fights that no camera ever filmed. What secret did he keep all those years, and why did he wait until the very end to tell everyone? When people think about the Karate Kid, they right away picture Mr. Miyagi, the quiet, fix-it guy with wise eyes, short sentences, and gentle strength, who helped Daniel LaRusso get through his hardest times. But what most fans never knew, until Pat Morita himself spoke up years later, is that the man who became Miyagi almost never got the chance. Actually, one of the most powerful people in Hollywood back then really didn't want him to have the role at all. Pat Morita was known mostly as a funny guy. People remembered him from being silly on TV shows, telling quick jokes, and being able to make people laugh at just the right time. To many bosses, that job history made him the very last person who could believably play a tough, sad mentor who had been through a war. When the role of Mr. Miyagi first came up during tryouts, Morita's name came into the room only to be pushed away by producer Jerry Weintraub. Weintraub, a really important person in the movie business, apparently said he didn't want a funny guy anywhere near this part. He wanted someone serious, someone really important, someone who could make people believe in a man who carried both sadness and wisdom without saying much. That was the wall, and for weeks that wall stayed strong. Every time Morita's name showed up on a list, Weintraub said no. To him, America had plenty of actors who could do the job better. The producers and casting people looked everywhere else, going through pictures, calling in actors who looked right, sounded right, or at least had the fancy background Weintraub wanted. Pat Morita? They didn't even let him try reading for the part. But here's where luck began to change things. Director John Avildsen, who had already made his mark in movie history with Rocky, wasn't interested in doing the same old thing. He knew that the Karate Kid would work only if there was more than just fights or training scenes. It needed a connection between teacher and student that felt real and human. And he didn't want to skip checking out anyone. Avildsen said that every possible person should be heard, whether Weintraub liked it or not. Pat Morita would later think about how weird it felt to be included in that whole cattle call process. By the time his turn came, he was the last actor brought in, almost like an afterthought. And the irony wasn't lost on him. The actor who the producer completely dismissed was now being seen because the director refused to give up. That moment. For an actor whose job had been stuck doing small TV parts and stand-up comedy gigs for years, this was bigger than just a tryout. It was an unexpected chance at a role that everyone else seemed determined to keep away from him. To Morita, it proved how unpredictable Hollywood could be. One day you're rejected, but that rejection might quietly open a door the next day. Way back when, with everyone loving Miyagi, people might forget that there was once a time, however short, when the air itself was thick with real tension during casting talks. Morita, however, would never forget it. He spoke openly later in life about how close Weintraub's group came to nearly destroying the project before it even started. It was John Avildsen's stubbornness that Morita said changed his whole career. This tells us more than just another behind-the-scenes fight. It tells us just how easily movie legends can almost not happen. One producer's quick decision, one boss's lack of care, that one moment made all the difference. If Avildsen hadn't stood his ground, Morita might never have walked into that tryout room. And without Morita, the Karate Kid wouldn't be the same story we all know. The wall he found himself facing would prove to be a really tough one in his art career, and as Pat himself would jokingly say over the years, walls should be climbed over or chopped through. Soon after, he found himself in a completely different place, but not one that even a person watching the movie would connect with the polished, funny guy they remembered. Because the man who walked into that tryout room wasn't the smooth comedian from TV. He was a bearded, tired person, fresh from Hawaii. Someone even he barely recognized in the mirror. By the early 1980s, Pat Morita's career was floating into unsure waters. He had tasted fame before, from comedy clubs to sitcoms like Happy Days, but the job offers had slowed down, and the spotlight felt like it was slipping away. Instead of chasing roles in Hollywood, he found himself in Hawaii, putting together a living through whatever work came his way. Hosting political fundraisers, writing ads for commercials, and performing in nightclubs. It wasn't fancy and it wasn't steady, but it paid the bills. To people watching from outside, it looked like Morita's career was slowly fading. To him, it felt like he was trying to stay afloat, waiting for something he couldn't see. And then came a decision that completely changed how he looked. For the first time in his life, he let his hair and beard grow out. Not for a role, not for a show, simply because he felt like trying something different. Pat later laughed about it, saying he looked more like a hippie than an actor. But at the time, he didn't care. He wasn't chasing casting directors or worried about looking ready for cameras. He was simply living, letting his appearance show the more unsure, unpolished chapter he was in. That beard, scruffy, unusual for him, would turn out to be a stroke of luck. He didn't know it then, but when the chance finally came to try out for the Karate Kid, that look helped create the impression of a weathered man who had lived through hard times. It made him appear older, wiser, and more solid than the comedian people were used to seeing. What started as a personal choice soon became an unplanned gift to his career. Pat had long accepted that quietness had become the theme of his life. Actually, when his contract with his agent came up, he almost thought about letting it end. But he thought again and gave his agent a kind of half-hearted renewal. What the heck? So one afternoon, he left his agent's office convinced that no jobs were waiting for him and ready to return to Hawaii. This was when luck stepped in with a loud shout. A loud voice had yelled from above, "Pat Morita!" The secretary ran out, shouting that he had just walked out the door. The agent leaned out and waved him back urgently. "Pat, get your butt back in here. There's a script I think is perfect for you." The script was The Karate Kid. It's the kind of story that seems too neat for Hollywood. Someone should write a movie about destiny. Morita later said that it felt more like a weird moment. There he was, standing with one foot out, ready to leave Los Angeles, and accepting that nothing was waiting for him here. And then, almost like some last-minute save, the script fell into his hands. He read it. He liked it. He agreed to try out for John Avildsen. At that point, it didn't feel like a life change. Just an opportunity. Another room. Another director. But the timing, the beard, and the coincidence of being called back in the door just at that moment, all began to make way for a bigger plan. When Morita talked about this incident looking back, he spoke about it with a sense of respect, thinking that maybe some invisible hand had pushed him back into the path he was supposed to take. Had he not been in Hawaii, he wouldn't have looked like Miyagi. Had he not re-signed with his agent, there would have been no script for anyone to give him. Had he not shuffled his feet on the sidewalk that day, luck might have passed him by. All those little decisions, accidents, and twists came together into one open door, to try out for a role the producers had never wanted him to read for. And when he finally walked into that tryout room, what he found wasn't a table of bosses or a group of judges. It was one man attached to a camera, watching him through the lens. When Pat Morita finally got his chance to read for the Karate Kid, he expected the usual Hollywood setup, a casting helper, a producer writing notes, maybe even a writer in the corner, everyone waiting to judge his every word. Instead, he walked into an almost empty room, and right into one of the strangest tryouts of his career. Sitting there was John Avildsen, the director who had already made his name in movie history with Rocky. But Avildsen wasn't sitting casually behind a desk or flipping through a script. He was half man, half machine. On one side of his body, he held a camera. On the other hand, he carried the heavy battery pack strapped against his body. He introduced himself nicely, but he never put down the camera. From the moment Morita stepped in, he was being filmed. Morita would later joke that his first impression of Avildsen was that of a half-man, part director, part recording device. But underneath the humor was a serious point. Avildsen wanted to see more than just a polished reading. He wanted to capture the real presence of the man in front of him. to see if Pat could be Miyagi when no one else believed he could. "Tell me a little about yourself," Avildsen said, still looking from behind the lens. And so Pat spoke, not in practiced lines, but in stories about his life, his career, his ups and downs. In that moment, he wasn't trying out in the normal way. He was opening a window into who he really was. And Avildsen kept filming. Then came the script. Pat wasn't going to read off some safe line or two for one of the toughest scenes, ones that hadn't been set up, practiced, or anything else yet. He made it up as he went, leaning into the emotional weight with everything he had as Miyagi, without sets, costumes, or another actor to work with. As he finished, he just expected a polite "thank you" and dismissal. Instead, as he started to walk away, Avildsen called, "Pat, don't you want to take your script with you? You might need it." That one sentence was exciting. It was the first time Morita felt that maybe, just maybe, he had broken through the wall of doubt around him. He had walked in as a comedian with a beard. He walked out as someone who could very well become Mr. Miyagi against all odds. Avildsen had already made up his mind. Later in meetings, when the producers were arguing over possible casting choices, he would show that tape again. One time in a heated discussion, he just turned on the monitor while they were talking. The meeting got quiet as Morita's tryout appeared on the screen. Then Weintraub, the very one who had refused to even consider him, said, "Hey, wait a minute. That looks like Miyagi." Avildsen turned calmly and said, "That's the Pat Morita you refused to read for the part." The tape didn't just prove that Morita could act. It proved that he was Miyagi in a way that no one else was. It was the crack that started to break down the wall of resistance. Of course, Hollywood doesn't give up anything without a fight. Even when Avildsen's tape was impressive, Morita was called back again and again. The producers wanted to be sure. Could he do the performance again? Could he do it in costume? Would he be able to hold his own next to Ralph Macchio? Morita delivered. Every time. In time, the doubt got smaller. But it all started from that one camera test when Pat Morita faced not a group of doubters, but the careful attention of a director who believed in capturing truth on film. And soon, the tests wouldn't just be about him. They would put him side by side with a young actor from New York to see if a real connection could happen between student and teacher. For most actors, one good tryout is enough to get a role. For Pat Morita, it took 5. Even after John Avildsen's tape won over the doubters, the producers wanted more. They needed to be certain that the man they had dismissed as a comic could capture the soul of Mr. Miyagi. And so began a tough series of tests, 5 separate times designed to prove whether Pat Morita could not only act the part but live it. The first 2 tests were simple do-overs. Could he recreate the same intensity and subtlety from his first tryout? Could he tap into the quiet authority of Miyagi without slipping into humor or fake acting? Each time, Morita delivered. He carried himself with dignity, spoke with weight, and showed flashes of vulnerability that hinted at Miyagi's deeper story. But the third test raised the stakes. This time, Ralph Macchio flew in from New York. The producers needed to know, could the chemistry between Daniel LaRusso and Mr. Miyagi feel real? The script called for a bond that was more than teacher and student. It was father and son, mentor and guide. If Morita and Macchio didn't connect, the entire movie would fall apart. First, they would read together. Just simple conversations, then into dramatic stuff. The wax-on, wax-off moments, deep soul-sharing confessions, and quiet silences that scream louder than words. The serious weight wasn't just something Morita brought to his relationship with Macchio. Rather, it was the warm, real response that he had. He listened. He reacted. He guided. And slowly Macchio leaned into him as though he were someone he could trust. That would be the first sign of a partnership that would anchor the entire movie series. The producers could see it, but they needed more before making the final decision. The fourth test added costumes. Would Morita be able to look the part? In a simple GI with his beard and hair as key features, he completely changed. The nightclub comic or sitcom regular was gone. In his place stood a man shaped by age, experience, and quiet pain. Even Ralph later admitted that when Pat dressed as Miyagi, The transformation was startling. It was as if he became the character. But studio heads wanted guarantees beyond guarantees. The fifth and final test was the clincher. They called for a reading on a cold, empty soundstage. No sets, no props, just Morita, Macchio, and the camera. It was the ultimate stress test. Was there still magic under the most basic conditions? The answer came quickly. The two interacted as if it was natural. Morita didn't act. He lived as Miyagi. Macchio didn't deliver lines. He was responding to a mentor who seemed very real. When the camera stopped, the silence was loud. 5 tryouts had not only proved that he could act, they proved he was Miyagi in a way no one else could even begin to match. It had been quite a trial, but it created something lasting. After that, Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita were no longer co-stars. Ralph and Pat became Daniel and Miyagi, bonded forever by a chemistry that reached across generations. The 5 perfect tests had proved Morita was Miyagi, but it took one phone call from the toughest doubter to finally seal his fate. When Pat Morita finally cleared the obstacle course of tryouts, screen tests, and chemistry reads, there was still one lingering shadow: Jerry Weintraub. The powerful producer had been the wall that almost kept Morita out of the Karate Kid. He didn't want a comedian in the role. He didn't trust that Pat could deliver the weight and seriousness of a mentor figure. For weeks, Morita's future had hung on the edge of Weintraub's doubt. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It happened after the 5th test, when Morita and Ralph Macchio in costume performed in front of the studio heads. It wasn't a flashy scene with karate kicks or big music. It was a quiet exchange. Miyagi speaking with Daniel in that clipped, halting rhythm Pat had shaped out of tiredness and instinct. Daniel answered not as an actor reading lines, but as a boy leaning into the wisdom of someone who seemed to care. The stillness of it carried more weight than any action sequence ever could. Avildsen, confident as ever, let the camera roll. He had been Morita's champion from the beginning, fighting for his inclusion, keeping his tape in circulation, replaying the footage whenever Weintraub grew dismissive. Now, in front of a full room, Morita and Macchio were undeniable. When the test ended, there was no laughter, no doubt, just silence, a silence heavy enough to tip the balance. Weintraub picked up the phone. On the other end was Morita, waiting at home, still unsure if the role he had poured himself into would slip away. Weintraub didn't waste words. His voice, usually sharp and unbending, carried a different weight now. "Pat," he said, "I almost made the worst mistake of my life. I just want to be the first to congratulate you. You've got the part of Miyagi." Morita had wanted that job for personal redemption, proving to the world and himself. Not just a comedian, not just Morita. It was the man opposing him who now had to eat his words. In one phone call, the tide turned, and the entire balance of power in the production shifted. The room that had once looked down at him was now standing up in respect. Pat would say he felt triumph and humility all at once. He hadn't raised his voice, bragged, or pointed out how close they had come to excluding him. With quiet pride, he had simply accepted the role. He knew that this victory meant so much more than just his own career. Miyagi was more than a character. He was destined to be a cultural icon. Though it was a turning point for Morita, it was more than that for the film. With Miyagi cast, production was tied together. Ralph Macchio had his mentor by heart, John Avildsen had his vision, and Jerry Weintraub had the guts to admit when he was wrong. The victory was even sweeter for Pat because it was hard-fought. The part wasn't handed to him. He had to fight through a lot of doubt. Now, he could step into Mr. Miyagi's shoes for the first time with all the confidence his worth could give him, with Weintraub's words ringing in his ears. But even with the part secured, Pat Morita's battle wasn't over. Once the cameras started rolling, he faced a new challenge: convincing audiences that Miyagi's broken English wasn't comedy, but poetry. Getting the role of Mr. Miyagi was one victory. Giving Miyagi a voice the world would never forget was another. Pat Morita knew that how Miyagi spoke could make or break the character. If the voice leaned too far into fake acting, it risked being a stereotype, another broad brushstroke Hollywood often used for Asian characters. If it were too polished, too smooth, It wouldn't fit the script's vision of an immigrant janitor and war veteran, grounded in broken rhythms of English learned late in life. Morita had to find the balance between dignity and authenticity. Ironically, the first spark came from tiredness. During his early tryouts, Morita was tired, drained from the long process of proving himself. His energy ran low and his words slowed, dropping into clipped, halting phrases. "That's why Miyagi talks like this," Morita later explained with a sly smile. It wasn't planned. It was simply what came out when he didn't have the strength to overthink. But Avildsen and others saw something in it. The rhythm wasn't clownish. It wasn't forced. It carried weight. It felt true to Miyagi's history. Still, Morita made it better carefully. He leaned into the idea of a man who spoke with careful pauses, someone who had learned English as a second language, but thought deeply before each word. Instead of a weakness, the broken grammar became a kind of poetry. A man who catches flies with chopsticks can accomplish anything, Miyagi tells Daniel, and it lands not as a joke, but as a piece of ancient wisdom. The rhythm made people lean in, listen closer, as if every pause carried meaning. Ralph Macchio would later say that he was disarmed by the voice at first. He knew Morita as a comedian with a smooth, quick tongue. But suddenly, and that contrast was magic, he was facing a different person. Quiet and almost meditative, with words dropping like small stones into water. Daniel was full of nervous energy and stumbling through his sentences, whereas Miyagi, speaking in spare broken English, calmed the air around him. The two rhythms complemented each other perfectly. Of course, some in the studio were still worried. Was this too much? Would audiences laugh for the wrong reasons? Morita had his own worries. He knew Hollywood had a long history of using accents to put people down, not lift them up. But he had faith that if he filled Miyagi with dignity, if he tapped into the voice with truth rather than fake acting, it would rise above stereotype. And he was right. Rather than being a punchline, the way Miyagi spoke became part of his wit, gentleness, and charm. Off-screen, Morita's voice was naturally smooth, flowing in an almost song-like way, totally different from the halting, choppy Miyagi tongue. Many fans were shocked to discover this contrast in interviews later on. They could hardly believe it. The polished, witty man sharing stories and experiences with them was the same guy saying, "Wax on, wax off," with such a halting, broken rhythm. But that was Morita's artistry. He created a mask, a performance that fit so well that it seemed real. That voice became bigger than an accent. It became a character in itself. Kids did impressions. Grown-ups remembered it. Comedians copied it. But some of that cultural echo always kept the seriousness. Morita had given life to a character with dignity, humor and sorrow all mixed together. And yet, for all his care in shaping Miyagi's voice, Morita would find himself facing a deeper irony. The role that saved his career also trapped him in ways he could never fully escape. For Pat Morita, The Karate Kid wasn't just a movie. It was a turning point, a second life after years of struggle. While the world remembers the crane kick, the wax-on lessons, and Miyagi's calm wisdom, Morita himself carried quieter memories from the set, pieces of time that defined his bond with the cast and his personal journey. These were the moments he never forgot. One of them was the night shoot for the famous Drunk Miyagi scene. The studio had doubts about including it. Bosses wondered if audiences would tolerate seeing the wise mentor as vulnerable, broken by the memory of losing his wife and child in an internment camp. But Morita fought for it. He poured his soul into the scene, stumbling through Miyagi's sorrow with a rawness that stunned the crew into silence. Ralph Macchio later recalled that after the cameras stopped, no one clapped, no one spoke. They just let Morita have his silence. For Pat, that night was proof he could do more than comedy. He could move people to tears. Another memory came from a smaller, less scripted moment, the catching the fly with chopsticks gag. The scene was written as light comedy, but Morita made it something richer. He played it with an almost childlike focus, his hands steady, his eyes locked on the impossible task. When Daniel succeeds instead, the chemistry between them bursts into laughter that feels genuine. Morita loved that little scene because it revealed something vital. Miyagi wasn't just a teacher. He was a man who could laugh, compete, and be surprised. The relationship with Ralph Macchio was certainly another treasured memory for Morita. Ralph was still a teenager when they were filming, dealing with all the complications of fame and pressure, while Morita, being much older, found himself in a protective role off-set as well. He taught Ralph life lessons with gentle humor and life experience, not only on camera but also off. Years later, Macchio would refer to their relationship as the heart of the movie, on screen and off. For Morita, that love was not scripted. It was real, enhanced every day they were performing together. He also recalls how the crew's doubt gradually died down over time. At one point, a number of them had wondered whether the comedian from Happy Days could pull off the role. But Morita could see a change as the days went by. By the time the tournament scenes were being filmed, even the stunt team treated him with the kind of respect reserved for people of distinction. He wasn't just an actor playing a sensei. He'd actually become one in their eyes. That respect stayed with him long after the cameras had finished rolling. Like all the little rituals Morita created between takes, this one was also about slipping into the voice of Miyagi. Not for the camera. He kept himself grounded by doing this. Sometimes he'd make up advice in broken English, half in his own rhythm, to the crew. They started seeking him out, joking that Miyagi was giving them life lessons during scene changes. It was precious to Morita because it meant that Miyagi wasn't only in words. He was alive to everyone who came near. In hindsight, Morita would come to know that all those moments, laughter, silence, and chemistry, were what gave the movie its soul. He understood. The crane kick would live forever, but he cared about the friendships made in the quiet corners of the set. The proof that something genuine had taken root behind the Hollywood machinery. And at the very end of his life, as Pat Morita remembered these memories, it was clear. Mr. Miyagi wasn't just a role that he played. It was truly a gift that actually shaped him as much as he shaped it. In one last reflection, Pat recognized that The Karate Kid had given him something no other project ever had. The chance to be remembered not as a comedian with a lucky break, but as an artist who poured his heart into a character that touched the world. If Pat Morita's own words changed how you see The Karate Kid, tap like, tell us your favorite Miyagi moment in the comments, and subscribe for more untold set stories. When you're ready, watch the next video on your screen for another behind-the-scenes truth that actors only revealed years later.